Seeing the crowds, he went unto the mountain. And when he was seated, his disciples came to him. Then he began to speak. And this is what he taught them. Matthew 5, verses 1 and 2. I'd like to speak today about the Beatitudes in 21st century America. The theologian and writer Joseph Ratzinger, Pope Emeritus Benedict XVI, in the second volume of his Jesus of Nazareth, asks why Christians are more focused on the Ten Commandments than they are on the Beatitudes, the Torah of the Messiah as understood through Christ. The Beatitudes draw for us a very strange picture of the man and woman who is blessed. He is poor, she is hungry. They are trodden upon, yet able to make peace. Pope Francis explained in one of his Angelus sermons that Luke's Sermon on the Plain has Jesus first present a list of those who are blessed. They are the poor, the hungry, the afflicted, and the persecuted. But Luke also has Jesus give a list of those who rate a woe to you, a warning to the rich, a warning to the full, a warning to those who laugh at those who suffer, a warning to those acclaimed by the people. God is close to those who suffer, and God intervenes to free them from their slavery. For Pope Francis, some people believe themselves to be good Christians, but do not even act like good Christians as directed by the Beatitudes. Francis gives us three Christian styles that do not belong to Christianity. Which is your style? What is your attitude? The first one he describes is the accusatory style, which belongs to those who always try and live by accusing others, by disqualifying others, acting as absent promoters of Jesus. In the Bible, the devil is called the great accuser, who is always accusing others. Jesus, in a few cases, reproached the accusers. Instead of looking at the speck in your eyes of others, look at the beam in yours. Matthew 7:3. Or again, those who have not sinned throw the first stone. John 8:7. The second style that Francis tells us about is the worldliness style, an attitude of Christians who can recite the creed but live on vanity, pride, and attachment to money, believing themselves to be self-sufficient, not in need of others or in the community. They enter into a spirit of vanity, a spirit of pride, a spirit of being seen. Humility, that is a beatitude, is lacking in their lives. This third style for Francis is the selfish spirit, the spirit of indifference that's common in our communities. One believes oneself to be a good Christian, but does not worry about the problems of others, doesn't worry about war, doesn't worry about the illnesses of others, or about the suffering of our neighbor. This is the hypocrisy that Jesus reproached the doctors of law for not safeguarding the people with the law. They are so attached to the law that they forget about justice and they forget about love. Jesus went further and reproached their attitude. If you, before the needs of your elderly parents, say, "Dear parents, I love you so much. I cannot help you because I've given everything to the temple." This is in contradiction to the Christian style that's in the Beatitudes, that of meekness, that of patience and suffering, that of love for justice, the ability to endure persecution and not judging others. Yet, when modern-day politicians, our current doctors of the law, are overcome by vice, it produces exploitation, denial of human rights, racism, xenophobia, and the plundering of the earth's goods for the sake of turning a great profit. As the Jesuit Father William J. O'Malley points out, in the me first age, the social media age, most people restrict Jesus' blessings and Luke's Beatitudes to the literal poor, to the literally destitute, the literally starving, weeping, and despised. They restrict the woes that Jesus hurled to the Donald Trumps and the bubble-headed who read the Acme of Reality on Fox and Friends. For Father O'Malley, Matthew's Sermon on the Mount has a much more satisfactory take on the same qualifications than what he sees as the mellower Luke's Sermon on the Plain. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Jesus is not suggesting we envy the literal starving. The Beatitudes described what might be called the actual condition of Jesus' disciples. They are poor. They are hungry. They are weeping. They are hated, and they are persecuted. Luke 6:23. Jesus is lauding those who are lucky enough to realize how hollow the politicians' promises are, to realize how disappointing the advertisers' lures are. The story of the earthly life of Jesus Christ is a story of human failure, a story of human poverty, a story of human foolishness. The Beatitudes are paradoxes. The standards of the world are turned upside down. Matthew's version presents a sort of veiled interior biography of Jesus. He has no place to lay his head. He is truly poor. Matthew 8:20. He who can say, "Come to me, for I am meek and lowly in heart," is truly meek. Matthew 11:28 and 29. He is the one who is pure of heart, and so unceasingly beholds God. He is the peacemaker. He is the one who suffers for God's sake. God gives his grace to his disciples who follow and who live the Beatitudes daily. This experience of grace is found only in the practice of Jesus' commands, not in the hearing of the commands, and not in the intention to follow and live the commands. The Christian community, the Beatitudes reminds us, stands over against the world, even as the Christian community is situated within the world. This requires our contemporary Christian community to live by some alienation from and critique of the institutional arrangements of the larger society. Deep involvement in developing distinct alternatives to societies negligent of those the Beatitudes cause us to unite with. Matthew 5:39 tells us, "Do not resist one who is evil," and that is followed by 4 specific and extreme commands. Turn the cheek. Let the person have your cloak. Go 2 miles. Give to the one who begs from you, which stands in the way we normally live and think. We, the hearers of the Sermon on the Mount, are called to take social and economic responsibility for others in our local community, who, like us, suffer from economically oppressive behavior, to extend mercy even to those who are our enemies. This is how we are to realize God's will. As we witness the abuse of economic power, as we witness the cruelties of capitalism that degrades men and women to the level of merchandise, the Amazonization of today, of same-day delivery, the world of social influencers, we have also realized the perils of wealth. And we've gained a new appreciation of what Jesus meant when he warned of riches, warned of the man-destroying divinity Mammon, the devil of covetousness, the greedy pursuit of gain. You cannot serve both God and Mammon, Matthew 6:24, which grips large parts of the world in a cruel stranglehold. A stranglehold which is creating destruction to our planet, to the collapse of creation. Humankind is moving from steward of creation to the destroyer of creation because of our current way of having to have and putting a price on everything, but neglecting the price of life for all of creation. The Sermon on the Mount demands inclusive mercy, not to perceive the other in terms of their gender, sexual orientation, their race, their nationality, their religion, their class, or their political party affiliation. None of these stereotypes. It requires solidarity with the oppressed and a nonviolent response to evil. The Sermon on the Mount is a call to even love the enemy. Matthew 5:44 or Matthew 7:12. The Beatitudes mandate a way of life necessary for human survival and that of the survival of all creation. Dr. Martin Luther King cited the sermon's demand for love as a foundation for the civil rights movement's strategy of nonviolent protest. We saw recently the almost entirely nonviolent protest in Puerto Rico, of the Women's March on Washington after the 2017 inauguration, of the protests in D.C. against gun violence in our schools and communities after the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida shootings. The world stands in direct opposition to God's plan for creation. It is the world marked by oppression, by bondage, and social injustice. The Sermon on the Mount calls the Christian community to do the will of God. The will of God is justice, and the word justice is also translated as righteousness and appears 5 times in the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 5:6, Matthew 5:10, Matthew 5:20, Matthew 6:1, and Matthew 6:33. Justice promotes the principle which shapes the sermon structure. The Beatitudes outline how relationships and resources are reassessed. The Christian church does not have a social ethic. Stanley Hauer tells us that the Christian church is a social ethic. Finally, the kingdom of God means then to identify with all people, to identify with the oppressed, to identify with the downtrodden. We are called to give life to those who have none, to renounce the oppressive relationships of one person over another, or of one nation over another. We are called to bring all people and all nations to mutual solidarity, called to liberate people from any kind of fear. The first beatitude requires an evangelical poverty, an interior liberty expressed in concrete and social lifestyle, one marked by a predilection for the poor. In the Babylonian conquest of Judea, 90% of the Judeans would have been counted among the poor. The Persian tax policy resulted in another situation of dramatic poverty after the exile. No longer did the Judeans maintain that the righteous prosper and poverty is a consequence of a bad life. Now the Judeans recognized that its poverty is exactly what brings Israel closer to God. The Judeans recognized that the poor, in their humility, are the ones closest to God's heart, whereas the opposite is true of the arrogant pride of the rich, who rely only on themselves. The third and fourth beatitude calls upon Christians to be just, to desire the propagation of this justice for all, requiring a conversion of heart, a personal change, a social dimension which opposes social sinfulness, and demands from the church to toil for justice and service to the poor. In conclusion, the Beatitudes and the Sermon on the Mount demand a distinct way of life for the disciples of Christ, engaged but not of the world. The church as a whole must never forget that she has to remain recognizably the community of God's poor. In the antithesis of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus stands before neither as a rebate nor as a liberal, as orthodox nor as a Pharisee, but rather as a prophetic interpreter of the Torah. Jesus does not abolish the Torah, but fulfills it. Christians are to guarantee the dignity of all creation by rooting it in the dignity of God. Amen.